Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an addict and an alcoholic. I want to welcome everyone here. You guys keep coming back to the window of opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to extend that another few weeks to the end of April, to the end of March. We'll start the new Big Book study, Steve and I, on April 3rd, the first week of the month. But just to review, uh, what we have here in the window of opportunity is it's when a newcomer comes in, how much time do you have before that window closes, before that obsession returns? Do you have a year? Certainly not. Do you have a few months? Not likely. Few weeks? I don't think so. I think a few days would be pushing it. So what we did, and Chris Raymer suggested this, and he gave me the ball to carry, was let's come up with a way to, based on the assumption that we're working with someone who is going to relapse in 48 hours. All you have is 2 days with that person. What do you do before that obsession returns? How do you get to that person to buy some time? So we figured out a way to get a certain type of inventory in, a certain amount of amends, and get to some type of enlightenment to the spirit. And then, with an enlightened spirit, we can then go back and go through the book the right way, word for word, line by line, and take the time it is necessary to get through it. That person who's only got a couple of days doesn't have 4 months to go through the book word for word to get to how it works. It's just they'll be dead and buried by that time. So we set out to come up with this presentation, and where we are today is we have gone through the inventory, we've gone through the amends, and what we do in the window of opportunity when it comes to inventory, if you remember, is we kind of do it together. So it's a combination fourth and fifth step. As the prospect is writing out the inventory, we are talking about it. And the same goes for step 8, so that when we do actually execute the amends, we start right here, right now. I have that prospect pick up the phone and let's get to that first person, and maybe even the second or the third, and then make a commitment to make at least one amends a day from this point on until they're done. One a day. It's not that hard to do. So we get it set up, and then we get through the rest of the work, and then we start going back to the beginning with that person and go through the book slowly and meticulously. And where we are today is we've gotten to the point of the at the end of the last chapter we were at the end of chapter 6. It says the next chapter is devoted entirely to step 12, which not entirely accurate, because while the next chapter is devoted all to step 12, it's not devoted to all of step 12. It's devoted to one part of step 12. And let me put this up and let's start talking about this. If you have the window of opportunity workbook, I'm going to be starting on page 32 of that. There are one or two versions of this book out there. So whatever version you have, it's this page that has step 12 on it and mentions the 3-step parts of step 12. And as I said, this chapter that we're about to talk about, chapter 7, is focusing on one part of it. The 3 parts of the 12th step are the promise, the charge, and the challenge. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, the greatest promise we offer the newcomer. And it's covered in the doctor's opinion in the first 6 chapters. But nothing is free in this life. There's a cost for everything. So we're being handed a bill. In the second part of the 12th step, we're being charged with a responsibility to tell people of our experience and to help them to have the same. We are charged with that responsibility. And that is covered. The directions are covered in chapter 7, which is what we're going to talk about today, and to a great extent in chapter 10 to employers, which is not what we're going to get into today. The window of opportunity doesn't really afford us enough time to do that. That'll be done later when we go through the book slowly. And the third part of the 12th step, the greatest challenge of all, to practice these principles, these steps in all of our affairs. And where is that? You see, there isn't a chapter that's addressed to that. There isn't a section of the book that says, we're now going to talk about practicing these principles. Where is it? Well, I believe the book is written in a certain order for a reason. And if that's the case, then this has to be contained somewhere after chapter 7. But those chapters are entitled to wives, family, where are practicing these principles? Well, next week, we're going to answer that question. We're going to do a flyover of those chapters, and I'm going to show you how Bill very carefully, very deliberately puts these little seeds all through those chapters and tells us how to practice these principles in all of our affairs, so that the challenge is talked about and addressed in chapters 8 and 9, wives and family. But for today, what I wanted to focus on was that center part, that middle part, the charge. What do you do when you have that prospect in front of you? What do you do to take that person through the book? Now, ideally, this is not taking them through it. Let me get rid of this for a minute. Not taking them through it in the window of opportunity fashion. If you have the workbook, I'm going to ask that you get to the directions for working with others. That's appendix number 1. Let me close this. And let me see if I could find it to get this up here for you. Here it is. All right. No, you can't see that yet. So let me get it so you can see it. All right. Here, this is what it looks like. If you have the workbook, it's appendix number 1 all the way up in that corner. It's directions for working with others. If you've got your book, please take it out. What we're going to try and do is go through most of this appendix today. Now, in the actual window of opportunity, we don't really have the time to go through it like this, but we have the time today. So we're going to, we're going to take advantage of that and go through it to show the person how to work with another person. And I'll give, in the window of opportunity, I'll give these directions to the prospect, but I'm not going to sit down and go through it line by line the way I am now. That's too time consuming. And remember, we only have 2 days. We only have 2 days with that person. So where do we start? When you're sitting down and you've got that prospect in front of you, what do we need to know? Well, the first thing Bill tells us on page 89, paragraph 3, is not to start out with as an evangelist, a preacher, or a reformer, a temperance worker. Now, today we don't you don't have too many temperance workers walking around, but they did back then. But he's still telling us not to start out as a preacher. Remember when Ebby was talking to Bill, he did no preaching. He spoke in everyday language, and that's what we do when we talk to the prospect. We're not preaching, we're not talking down, and we're not trying to reform them. And then on page 90, the very top of the page, the second line gives us direction number 2. Find out all you can about the newcomer. Now, if you've underlined that in your book, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to tell you what you need to ask that person. And here it is. Do you really want to stop? That's all I need to know. All of the other things will fall into place. We'll get to that later, but find out all I can about the newcomer. At this point, the only thing I need to know is, do you want to stop? That's all. Find out all you can about the newcomer. Does he want to stop? And incidentally, one of the myths that we like to blow up in our workshops is this notion of telling the newcomer to take the cotton out of their ears and put it in their mouth and shut up and listen. And I would never tell anybody I love to shut up. And I love the newcomer and I love the people who come in here for the first time. And I want them to feel welcome and I want them to come back. And if you tell me shut up when I show up in a place for the first time, I'm never coming back. I don't feel very welcome there. So I think we need to approach those people with love. And the book tells us that we need to get those people talking. So I don't know where this notion of shutting up the newcomer came from, but it didn't come from this chapter. This chapter, and you're about to see, has several references to getting that person to talk. So here's one of them. Find out all you can about them. Okay, do you really want to stop? In the very next paragraph, it tells you to get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his seriousness of his condition, his religious leanings. Once again, ask him questions. Talk about himself. Can't do that if he's got a mouthful of cotton. We want to put ourselves in their place, so we have to find out a bit about their behavior, their problems, their background, the seriousness of their condition. And because we're dealing with an alcoholic or an addict, they're always going to be, if they're beginners, they're always going to be under the influence to some extent. I was. You couldn't get to me before I got into treatment and actually get me in a moment when I'm not either using or thinking of ways and means to get and use more. I'm not going to sit and listen to you unless I think I could put the squeeze on you for a few bucks. So we got to understand that the newcomer is going to be a little under the influence. So number 4 is don't deal with him when he's very drunk. He's always going to be a little drunk. He's always going to be under the influence because that's what we do. Remember when Ebby was talking to Bill, Bill was hitting that bottle before Ebby got there. And if Ebby walked in and saw the bottle and Bill started drinking from it and he left and he said, call me when you're not drinking, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be here. But Bill wasn't very drunk. He wasn't stupid, incomprehensible drunk. So don't talk to him when they are very drunk. But anything else, absolutely. Then number 5 on page 91, Bill tells us page 91, paragraph 3 begins with, see your man alone. That doesn't mean you go in alone. I like to take somebody with me at all times, especially a newcomer. But I have a selfish reason for taking people with me on a 12-step call. If I walk into that guy's living room and he's cleaning out his shotgun as we're starting to talk, I want someone next to me that I could throw in the line of fire in case things get a little ugly. So always have somebody with you. But when Bill says see your man alone, he's referring to family members not being present. Now, today, in all likelihood, we're going to be seeing that person at the back of a meeting room, maybe outside a meeting room, maybe at a coffee shop near the meeting room. We're not likely to be called into their living room. But if we are, see them without the family present. Okay. And then Bill tells us at first, engage in general conversation. Again, very difficult to do if you got a mouthful of cotton. So once again, talk, get that guy to talk. Tell him a little bit, engage in general conversation. Take note of the environment. Is he wearing a team t-shirt or a hat or a concert t-shirt? Talk to him about music. Talk to him about anything else that comes to mind in terms of general conversation. That's to get him talking a bit. And we all love to talk about ourselves and the things that we're interested in. So get that person to start to talk to you in general conversation. And then Bill tells us, number 6, after a while, Turn the talk to some phase of drinking. We are controlling the discourse. Don't misunderstand. When we say we want the prospect to be talking and speaking to us, we're not surrendering control. We have to hold on to the course of the conversation. And this is one place that tells me I'm doing that, because it says after a while, turn the talk. So I am conducting that discourse. I'm going to turn the talk to some phase of drinking. Tell him about my drinking habits, symptoms, experiences. Encourage him to speak of himself in relation to those experiences. And if he wishes to talk, let him do so. Once again, very difficult if the mouth is filled with cotton. So let him do so. You'll thus get a better idea of how you had to proceed. You are to proceed. And if he's not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking up until the time you quit. This is the time for the drunkalogue. This is the time for the war story. This is the time to tell that guy about all of the crazy, funny things you may have done. And we all have some of those stories. It wasn't always dismal. So talk about those things, but nothing after about how we quit, when we quit, how we quit, none of that. This is all about the time when we were using. Say nothing of how you quit. If he's in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, but be careful not to moralize or lecture. To me, the word moralize means to put something in terms of black and white, good and bad, evil and good. So if I'm telling something that I did in my active addiction, I'm not going to coax it with, I know this was a bad thing to do, but, or I know I did the wrong thing. I'm not moralizing. I'm just speaking the truth of my experience while drinking and drugging. That's all. I'm not going to code it anyway. I'm not going to editorialize it in any way. Number 7, if he sees you know about the drinking game, identify yourself at that point as an alcoholic. And basically what that means is I've painted a picture for you, right? I just told you about my drinking habits, my symptoms, my experiences. So I've painted this picture. You see this picture? This picture is called an alcoholic. That's what I am. I am an alcoholic. This is what an alcoholic looks like. So I'm describing myself. I'm not telling him that he is or she is. Number 8, on page 92, if you get to page 92, the first paragraph, tell him how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. Not morally corrupt, not bad, not evil, sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist, the obsession. Start talking about that obsession that leads to the first drink of a spree, which brings us to the craving. Number 9, if you're satisfied he's a real alcoholic, and there's another myth busted, I thought we're not supposed to decide whether people are alcoholics or not. Well, if I'm going to work with you, I better be satisfied you're a real alcoholic. So I need to be convinced. So if I'm satisfied with that fact, I'm going to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. I'm going to show him from my experience how that queer mental condition surrounding the first drink prevents the normal functioning of willpower. I can exercise my will almost in any area of my life without any problems. Why is it that when I set my mind to this, I could not do it? And that's what we're going to be stressing with that person. What is it like from our experience to not be able to control that? And once we take that, it triggers that craving, and that means my willpower cannot function normally. I cannot just say no. I cannot put the brakes on. Once I start, I cannot stop because of this mental upset, this physical allergy. And once I stop, I can't stay stopped because of the mental obsession that seeps in because I have this spiritual malady where I am restless and irritable and discontented. Everything hurts. I am overly sensitive. I am judgmental. I am possessive. I am not a nice person to be around. And I convinced myself that it would be better if I took that first drink, knowing what happens all the time. This time it's going to be different. And I take that first drink and I give in to the obsession that triggers the allergy, and I no longer can decide, even though we do like to say once in a while, I made a choice to take that second drink. No, we didn't. Once we take that first drink, the choice is not ours anymore. Our body is calling the shots. That's the physical craving that we're talking about. Number 10, don't brand him as an alcoholic. He has to draw his own conclusions. And here's a great opportunity. Where is it? 92.1. Begin to dwell on the hopeless future, blah, blah, blah. This is a great opportunity to ask the questions that we were posed on page 44. If we go back to page 44, paragraph 1, let's do that for a moment. I think it's important enough, so we should do it. On page 44 in We Agnostics, Bill makes a statement that we turned into questions. If you were here when we did it, you know what I'm talking about. The statement is, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. So we turned those into questions. Have you been able to quit entirely on your own? Ask him. And if his answer is yes, okay, go home. Go with God, my son, because you don't need to hang around here anymore. If you can stop, you don't need to do this work. God bless you. But if you haven't been able to stop entirely on your own, which is probably why you're sitting here talking to me, then you have to answer that question is no, I haven't been able to quit entirely on my own. And the second question, do you have any control over the amount you take once you start? Those questions are answered no. That means you might be an alcoholic. He's got to draw his own conclusions. But just like we drew our conclusions when we answered those questions on page 44, so must they. Number 11, continue. We're on page 92, paragraph 2 begins with, continue to speak of alcoholism as a disease, a fatal malady. Talk about those conditions of mind and body which accompany it over and over. Obsession, allergy, obsession, allergy. Keep his attention focused mainly on our experience. Explain that many are doomed to never realize that they have this allergy, they have this obsession, because we've been told by everybody around us that we're weak, that we're bad people. Just say no. We've got to let that person know what a relief it is to know that that's not the situation. Doctors don't want to tell the alcoholic about the whole story because they don't have the answer. We do, because we are offering a solution. Now, even though your prospect may not have entirely admitted his condition, he certainly has become curious as to how you got well. If he identifies with what you're telling him is your story, and he's starting to see himself in your story, he's starting to think, gee, if I'm the same as this person and they're not drinking or drugging, how did they do that? And that's what this is all about, is getting them to ask that question. Let them ask you, how did you get well? On page 93, the top second line from the top, let him ask you that question. Tell him exactly what happened. And I'll give you the answer for that too. What happened is not, I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. The answer is not, I got a sponsor, I took commitments, I made, all of those things are relevant. But that's not what happened to me. How did I do it? I accessed the power that did for me what I couldn't do for myself. That's how I did it. Everything else came as a result of that, of accessing that power and letting that power do for me what I couldn't do for myself. And we're going to stress the spiritual feature freely because that's what it says to do. And please note, this is the best opportunity to start to address the difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is a set of practices. You want to join our club and worship our imaginary best friend? Well, here's what you have to do. You got to pray like this, eat like this, dress like this, stand like this, kneel like this, on and on and on. You want to be part of the club? This is what you have to do. It's like a fraternity, not a religion, it's a fraternity. Spirituality is a set of disciplines. You have to have a discipline for prayer, meditation, and God. You define those. Nobody's ever going to tell you what those things mean. So we're going to stress the spiritual feature, but we're going to really differentiate it from religion. See, the minute I came in here, I thought you were talking about religion, and I couldn't hear anything until I got past that. So let's let him know that we're not talking about religion. This is a great opportunity to do that. Make it emphatic that he doesn't have to agree with your conception. He can have any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. The main thing is he be willing to believe in that power greater than himself. And again, if he has trouble with the concept of a power greater than himself, you just have to point out that a power greater than yourself brought you to me. That was a destructive power, the power of alcohol and drugs. So the concept of a power greater than you should not be foreign, but we're talking about a providential, beneficial power that can get between you and the first drink. Because I'm powerless against the first drink. So I need a buffer. And that power is the buffer. And this is where I suggest, and this isn't in the book, it's the only thing I think I will suggest that is not in the book, is to take a pad and a pen and list out the traits, the characteristics you would like your higher power to possess. Just list them. And again, if I'm sitting with the guy in a window of opportunity, I'm going to ask him to do it here in front of me. I'm not interested in seeing exactly what he has written down. I'm just interested in seeing that he has something written down, because then he can begin to approach that power. He has a starting point, and the book tells us we need a reasonable assumption as a starting point. And that reasonable assumption is that there is a power greater than ourselves that can do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. Just like drugs and alcohol did for us what we couldn't do for ourselves, so can this power, but in a beneficial, loving, constructive way. We're using everyday language to talk about spiritual principles. Again, let them see that you're not here to instruct them in religion. We're not talking about religion. And then we outline the program of action, explaining to them the step process without identifying it by the step number. Tell them how you made this self-appraisal, how you straightened out the past, why you're endeavoring to be helpful to him. It's important that he realize that my attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital part in my recovery, that he's actually helping me more than I'm helping him. Suggest how important it is that he placed the welfare of other people ahead of his own. He's not under any pressure to see us again. If he doesn't want to, that's fine. That you only hope that one day he will help other alcoholics when he has escaped his own difficulties. In other words, we'll love you until you learn to love someone else. I'm sorry. It's not we'll love you until you learn to love yourself. I didn't come here to be a narcissist. There's way too much narcissism in the world today. That's not why we come in here. I lived my life based on the AA opera. Me, 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 me. What's in it for me? Why do I do it? What do I get out of it? What should I do? Always me. I'm going to turn that around and start to give a damn about you, to go from God-centered, self-centered to God-centered. Where are we? How we straighten out the past, endeavoring to be helpful to him. Number 18, I love this. Disturb him about the nature of this disease, about the question of alcoholism. If you look up the word disturb in the dictionary, incidentally, it's defined as to make one uneasy. And that is exactly what we want to do. We want to make the newcomer uneasy, because that's what creates action, right? Why would you take your shoe off to get the stone out of it unless the stone was disturbing you, right? You take the shoe off, you shake it off, the stone is gone. Look at that. It's no longer disturbing you. Disturb. And I think it's important, maybe even more important, that we disturb the person with time who's sitting in the back of the room, who's been around 20 years, who has no sponsees, who doesn't work the steps to get that person involved. Disturb them about the nature of this disease. Number 19, on your first conversation, tell them about the fellowship. Let's talk about the fellowship. Turn to page 17 and underline these words for him that describe it on page 17. All of these words are there. Camaraderie, joyousness, democracy, friendliness, understanding, brotherly, harmonious action, the spirit of the fellowship, what they find when they come in here. Not the fellowship of the spirit of the fellowship, the atmosphere that exists in those rooms that are created by those of us who are part of and living in the solution, those of us who are part of the fellowship of the spirit. Once that newcomer listens to and believes he can do it also, he'll make use of the simple toolkit we lay at his feet, work those 12 steps, have a spiritual awakening, and then they will join the fellowship of the spirit, and they will create the spirit of the fellowship for the next newcomer who comes in. Now, sometimes a guy is anxious to proceed at once. Remember, please, we are on our first conversation. This is our first sit with the guy. And if he says he wants to get busy and work the steps, Bill isn't saying not to do that right here. He's saying it's sometimes a mistake. Use your judgment, use your experience. Because if he has trouble later, he could say that you rushed him. So if it's the first sit and he wants to or she wants to proceed, you make that call. You've got some experience with this. You make the call whether you want to start now or I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Come over to the house, bring some coffee and your book and a highlighter and some pens and so on. Remember, it's the first conversation. Bill also tells us on page 95 not to talk down from any moral or spiritual hilltop. Again, we're not talking holier than thou. We're not putting things in context of good and bad, black and white, none of that stuff. Tell him if he wants to get well, there's nothing you won't do to help him. And then on page 95, there are the 5 ifs. If he's interested, if he expects, if he is sincerely interested, if he is to find God, if he thinks he can find, if he can do the job in some other way, go with God. We have no monopoly on this. Let it go with that. We can't try to persuade that person that this is the only way, because you know what? It's not. It's the only way that worked for me. And I tried every other way. The last thing I tried was the first thing that worked. Bill called it the court of last resort. It's the last door on the last house of the last street I knock on. But if you could find another way, go right ahead. And I wouldn't be shitty and say, I'll keep a seat warm for you, because we're tempted to do that. If you could find another way, go right ahead. Bill tells us, don't be discouraged if they don't respond at once. If they don't, search out another prospect and work with them. Don't waste time on chasing someone who will not work with you. To spend too much time on one situation is to deny another alcoholic an opportunity. That's not dating instructions in recovery, incidentally. Page 96, paragraph 1 does not contain dating information. It's how to work with others. On the second conversation, if he then says he's prepared to go through with it, roll up your sleeves and get busy. Let him know if he wishes to make that decision in step 3. Tell his story in 4 and 5. And if he insists, if he says he's got some other person he's going to use as a sponsor, terrific. You did your job. You disturbed that person enough to get him off the bench and into the game. And if they choose to work with someone else, that's great. They're working in recovery. You've saved a life. So you did your job. Don't get personal that if he chooses to work with someone else, that's great. If he's broke or homeless, we try and get him a job. We may give him a little financial assistance. We don't take money away from where we might use it with our family. If you take him into your home, use discretion. Get your okay of the people who live in that house. Make sure he's welcomed by your family, and that he's not trying to impose on you for money, connections, and so on. Don't be an enabler, on page 96 and 97. And then Bill, on page 97, I bet most of you didn't know that we have 12 steps, 12 traditions, 12 concepts, but we also have 12 inconveniences. Did you know that? It's all on page 97. If you number them, you'll see they count to 12. What are the things that happen when you take on the responsibility of being a sponsor? What happens? It means the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures, and so on. I don't want to go through it all because we're starting to run out of time. Let's jump down a little bit. Let's right about here on page 100, the shift, the direction of the instructions shift away from instructions on working with the prospect. He shifts to extolling the benefits to them now that they are spiritually fit. It's like a coming attraction. Tell them what they can expect. Assume if they're spiritually fit, there's nothing you can't do. There's nowhere you can't go. If you meet 2 criteria, you're on solid spiritual ground. In other words, you're spiritually fit. You've worked the steps. You're existing in that 4th dimension, and that your motive for going wherever it is you're going is good. You can go anywhere. You can go to a crack house if you want to. If your motive is good, if you're spiritually fit and your motive is good. And incidentally, the motive isn't to get prospects and candidates for recovery. That's not a good reason for going into a crack house. But if you know someone who's in there and you want to get that person out, that's a good reason for going in there. Don't go alone. Please don't go alone. But there's a reason. If you're spiritually fit, there's a good reason for going there. It's probably the only reason for going in there. And the book tells us our job is now to be at a place where we can be of maximum service. And that's what's waiting for the prospect when he gets through this. And just to remember, practical experience shows nothing ensures immunity from drinking as extensive work with other alcoholics. It works when others fail. So carry the message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence. And because of your own drinking experience, you are uniquely useful to other alcoholics. And the book tells us life takes on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. And next week, we're going to talk about the practicing these principles, lifting them out of wives and the family afterwards, because they're all there. And again, let me stress that what we did today is a long version of what we would do with that prospect when we're sitting and we only have those 2 days. But we still need to talk to them about working with others. You want to stop the recording and we'll open it up if there are any questions or shares. Thank you all for having me.